The first step of this and designing a project of any kind is first you got to have an idea of what you want to make. And the way that I get ideas is I go on the internet and I'll go to Google and I'll search things. I knew I wanted to make a wine cabinet and was talking to people about different ideas, and we had this kind of industrial revolution theme defined for the conference. So I was thinking that it needed to be something kind of from that period, and so then I had the idea of doing maybe some kind of trunk or something. I think it was actually Michael Tyler who gave me the idea of doing a trunk, because I wanted to do some piece of cabinetry, because the last 2 years, last year I made the ray gun here, and everybody commented, everybody's like, oh, I love the ray gun, it's really neat, but I'm never going to make a ray gun. I'm a woodworker. Show me some woodworking stuff. So I wanted to do something woodworking this year, but still add my flair to it, because I'm not, I'm not going to build. I'm not Norm Abrams or whatever that guy's name is. Yeah. So I went online and I researched steamer trunks, and I found lots of different ones, and most of them were just very simple upholstered things with big heavy straps on them, and they're kind of ugly. And then I found some other chests, more like treasure chest type of trunks, and they had these leather embossed panels on them, and I thought that was really neat. So I decided to kind of combine the two styles of things into this, and so then I sat down and sketching things out and worked out the dimensions of it, figured that out, and then from there I knew what I needed to carve and what sizes I needed to carve. And so I had this kind of figured out, and I just started making these patterns. So I defined the pattern set, and then from there I started laying out the individual pieces. I had a whole set of patterns to work from, and I just started laying things out and arranging them until I get to something that looks kind of neat. So here we're going to lay out one of the panels here, and I'll show you the process I went through there. And these panels are 6 by 15, so I'm going to make it 15 and a half by 6.5. We'll just call it that. And I knew that I needed to carve them all the way down and just have patterns raised up. So on this carving, I knew I needed to define kind of a floor. But I also knew that being embossed leather, I don't need anything really deep. I need this to be pretty shallow. So I kept everything at a depth of 1/8 of an inch. So we'll define right away a floor of 1/8 of an inch, so I can work from there. And then I've got my pattern set that I created, and I'm going to start playing around with things. And so this is where I started taking those individual elements I made, and so I had this little C that I had created, and I had my rosette pattern that I made. I needed to change their depth so they'd match my floor depth to 1/8 of an inch. And
which part of the trunk are you laying out now?
We're doing the panels.
Which way? Any of them, or
they're all the same.
Okay.
And the other carvings involved there are variations on it, basically. But I thought it would be neat, or I ended up in this, as I'm just moving patterns around and kind of playing around with things and mirroring things to see how things would look. Because the patterns are really great for just pushing them together and combining them together here. Okay. So I started creating some things that I thought would be kind of neat. And then when I would get to a certain point, I'd fuse it into a pattern. And then once I had that pattern defined, I could move it around more easily, and then I could do things like rotating it. And start getting more complex with this. So we start off with that simple rosette I made and that C pattern, and we're starting to define it into something much more spectacular just by moving things around. So let's do our push and pull. Let's push this one back behind the other. And we start adding other elements to it. So this is another thing that I modeled out that was the same thing as our flower, but it's just a half of a one that I could nest in these little open areas down in here. And actually, I fused that one into a pattern already there. So, pretty nice layout so far, right? Okay, so I'm starting to get the look that I'm wanting out of this leather piece, and I was referencing things online like embossed leather. What are these patterns that you see in embossed leather? What do they look like? And so I'm kind of working from that and seeing if I can't recreate some of that look. There's a question here.
You made a pattern out of a pattern.
Yep, I've made a pattern out of a pattern, and then a pattern out of that pattern, and a pattern.
You might go back real slow
Uh-huh.
and show us, because I missed where you put.
Well, I was skipping over that making pattern process because I've already got them in my library.
Okay.
So the way that you make those patterns is the same way that we made them on the previous ones we did. You select the elements that you're going to fuse into a pattern, and then you put them in a group, right? And then you select that group, and then select the Make Pattern button. Make Pattern. And then you save it to your pattern library. Okay, so we've got this pattern element design. We've taken just the elements that we started with, and we've really expanded it out into something kind of neat. And then let's move this over here, and let's mirror it across, and then let's take some of the other elements we've defined. This little filigree. And we'll rotate that 90 degrees. Kind of just put it into place here. And then we'll mirror that all. Make these a little bigger. And we'll move, we need some more of these on the edges. So we'll copy and paste it and then just move it. And then mirror that all again. And so, two patterns. Well, we made one pattern from two elements, or a couple elements there, but then we end up with this whole piece just through mirroring and some placement. We end up with these panels. As far as layout goes, it's the same thing as doing any other kind of layout, from doing the simple sign project or as basic as you get. You arrange your elements on the board, just put them where you want them, size them how you want them, use your mirror tools to create your symmetry, and you've got your thing. So we just took that and started at a pattern modeling point where we defined our own patterns, and then we've just expanded it from there. And just by combining those elements together, you can get really elaborate patterns out of the process from just starting at very simple, basic elements to begin with.
This is on leather?
Yeah, so on the trunk here, if you haven't come up and looked at it, you'll notice that all the panels on that are upholstered, basically. They are leather panels. I got two of them. I'll start one on each end. And I'm going to show you how I did these, because this trunk has 14 of these panels on it. And I've got all of this carving to do, 14 of these panels. So we're going only 1/8 of an inch deep, and they're 15 by 6. So on normal carving mode, what would we say? Probably about an hour each. Of 14 hours of carving to do all of these panels. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to spend 14 hours carving. So I wanted to figure out a way that I could carve it once and then reproduce it. So I played around with some techniques that I had developed when I was doing my blog on the chocolates. If anybody follows my blog, if you don't, you should. The build blog on the CarveWright website is where I play around with the machine and the software, and I make stuff. And I show you guys how I did it and what I did. I show you my mistakes and how I fixed it, and the ideas and the experimentation that I go through to get to where I'm going. So I made these chocolates, and then I made these stamped tin boxes to go with them. And I did that by creating a negative positive mold, basically, where I carved out my pattern as a negative and a positive, and then I put them together. And then I just sandwiched it with a hydraulic press, or you could use almost anything, just need weight to push it together. So when I was experimenting with the tin, I got real excited. I'm like, what else can I stamp? So I grabbed every surface I could fit into the thing and stamped it, like from notebooks to every kind of paper I could find, anything that I could find to stamp. And I had some leather that I started playing around with. I'm like, okay, now this is really getting cool. I can stamp leather. And so I started playing around with vinyl, because leather is expensive. So, and I started getting some really, really neat results. And pass some of these things around. So I'm like, okay, I did this experimentation already, and I know that the look that I want to get these leather panels in there, and I've got this great technique that I've developed. So let's do it again. So I made my negative positive mold of the carving that I just made there.
Are those wood?
Now this is corian here, and corian, this was somebody's shower wall, you know, and you, I'm sure you guys are already this way. If you're into woodworking and building in general, you're a scavenger, and you gotta be. Yeah, you find stuff, and you can always find stuff. So this guy, he had remodeled his bathroom and he pulled out these shower balls. Didn't know what to do with this big giant sheet of corian that I'm like, I'll take it. I'll drive across town and I'll find a pickup truck and I'll come get
Very
it.
expensive, you just go buy it, so.
Yeah, that's expensive stuff, and to get a sheet that big for free is invaluable. So you find it. A lot of construction people, installers, when they're putting in countertops for kitchens and stuff, they're making it out of corian most of the time, and they cut out holes for sinks, and they throw that piece away. So get to know your local construction crews and pick up that scrap that they're getting rid of. Okay, so yeah, we just had a comment about that. Yeah, so this leather, it's not rigid, and it's not actually leather. It's a vinyl product that I found at the fabric store on the clearance rack. And remnant stuff, but it looked like leather, feels like leather. It's fantastic, and so I'm going to use that because leather is expensive. So I needed to be able to somehow back this embossing that I was doing with something that was going to be more rigid, because I can't just have these bubbles there where you can press it in and stuff. There's too much depth to it. So it's not an embossing where it's just a surface emboss. There's a lot more depth involved here. So I experimented with some techniques. So here's me I've got the leather in there and I'm putting it together. But the first thing that I actually did was I would take a heat gun and heat up the leather just to get it, or the vinyl, to get it so that it was hot and it would help stretch it when I put it into the press. So I heated it up till it was hot to touch, and then I put it in between my two pieces of corian. And then I'd go to my press. So this is my bottle jack press, basically. It's from Harbor Freight. It's not expensive. They have different sizes. You can find these things, or you can make one out of your own bottle jack too. I'm sure it's not too difficult. It's a bottle jack and some springs on a steel frame. And so there's my piece after it comes off the press. And this is the underside of it. And it's got the embossing in there. And in order to make it hold that shape, I played around with some things and came up with water putty. And water putty, everybody knows water putty. Everybody, if you guys haven't used water putty, I'd be surprised. But this stuff's been around forever, and it's the greatest thing out there. It's simple, easy to use, and it's hard. So I mixed up some water putty, and I poured it there, and I kept it kind of thin, and then I just smoothed it into my embossing, and just squeegeed it in there. Then I took my 1/4-inch plywood, the oak. I just got some 1/4-inch oak plywood, which is what you see on the inside, and I just sprayed adhesive, and then I would attach it to my water putty embossed vinyl, and I had some lines marked on here to help me position it so I would get it in the right place, and then get it positioned, and then go back to the press and squish it down again. And then what you see there is what the result was, and I would trim it from there, and I was able to make 14 of these things in an afternoon.
Wow.
Rather than spending 14 hours carving, which we all know takes, 14 hours carving would be 20 plus hours, because the in-between time of getting your board prepped and loaded in and getting it set up, and yeah, it would have been a 3 days process. Instead, it was one afternoon.
How long do you leave it on the press for?
I would leave it on till it dried,
I'll pass the try.
till it would get hard enough.
10 minutes or 30 minutes, ballpark.
Well, actually, we joked around about that, and we were like, well, and so the actual time in scientific measurement is a smoke break and a pee.
Just one cigarette, all right?
Yes.
What kind of cigarette?
So it wasn't long. Less than 10 minutes on the press and you're ready to go.
The vinyl you use, is that just any vinyl, or did you try different?
I tried several different kinds of vinyl. This vinyl, and I should have brought in a piece of it, but on one of those pieces, not the one with the wood on it, the other one has a corner that's lifted away a little bit, so that you can kind of peek underside and see the rock hard in there, and then you can also kind of see the backside of that vinyl. This vinyl was really interesting because it has a lot of leather-like qualities to it. The backing on it feels like the back of leather, and it's pretty thin stuff, and it's got a little bit of stretch to it, which made it really workable. And it very as workable as leather is. It had the same kind of stretch and give and stuff that I would get out of a piece of leather like that. I've used the felt back vinyl stuff, and when I'm passing around one of my robots, there has got the felt back stuff. That stuff worked all right too. And then there's the vinyl that has the kind of a white mesh back to it. It's the more upholstery kind of vinyl for cars and boats and things like that. Just stay away from that stuff. It's got way too much spring to it. So anything you press into it, you're like, oh, that looks great, as it disappears. But other than that, like the felt back stuff, it's kind of more of a fabric that's not such vinyl-y type of material.
Joe,
Yeah.
when you make the positive and the negative mold,
Uh-huh.
is there a space in between, or is it?
Well, actually, those are good, important questions, because these things have got to match up, but they've also got to give you a little bit of clearance for whatever you're pressing, because you can't have it be total exact fit that doesn't give you any clearance to allow you to push anything in between it. But our software does this automatically, amazingly, by not doing optimization, basically. And let me show you. So the way that I did these, I had to make the whole panel into a pattern. So once I had this all laid out like this, then I put it in a folder, make pattern. And then I could take that pattern, and I've got them here. I would lay it down, and then I'd make one inverted, so it'd be inside out. And then I would leave that one alone, and not put any bit optimization on it. And does everybody understand bit optimization?
No.
Let me talk a little bit about bit optimization. So, your carving bit, it's got a 16th inch ball nose tip on it. And in your carvings, sometimes patterns have little tiny areas that are smaller than what your bit size is. But the machine and the software, the machine's going to go and chase down everything that you tell it to. So if you've got this little area that's a deep part that's smaller than what your bit is, it's going to drive down and get to that point, but in the process it's going to kind of blow out the area around it. So what bit optimization does, and it's this tool up here, and it shows kind of these V shapes with a bit representation, and as it goes from none to best there, you'll see that the bit is raising up out of this blown out V there. It's kind of hard to see on these screens. But on best, you'll see that the bit is sitting above the V and it's not cutting into it. So the V is defined all the way, except for an area just right below where that bit's stopping. So bit optimization tells the system to go down as far as you can without disturbing the detail around it. And that's extremely useful and what you want to do most of the time that you're carving. You want to play around with those bit optimization tools, and it'll show you on the screen as it re-renders what the changes look like for what you're doing there. And that bit optimization is crucial, an important part of making sure that that chip out doesn't exist. Somebody was talking about chip out earlier. Bit optimization is one of those tools that you need to look at every time you go to carve. You need to play around with that and look at what you're doing. But unless you're doing this, because this is inverted, if I do bit optimization on an inverted one, it's actually going to make this smaller. And it's going to do that because it's going to not go down all the way to the edges on some of these things, and it's going to end up getting a little bit smaller. Now, if I do bit optimization on the positive, it's actually going to make it a little bit bigger because it's not going to come in so tight around all those edges. It's going to allow for more distance, especially on these thin areas. So if I put bit optimization on these two, they wouldn't have fit together because I would have been shrinking down my negative and increasing my positive in size to where they won't mesh together. And I know this for a fact because these aren't the only ones I've carved. I got a whole stash of trial and error. But that's good because now I can teach you. I can tell you what not to do. So by not putting the bit optimization, it automatically gives you just the right amount of clearance for stamping anything. For stamping metal, leather, it doesn't matter what it is. It just seems to be the perfect amount of clearance for sandwiching whatever thin material you need to put in there.
So what do you cut it on then too? Draft or normal or what?
I just do the Corian on normal. For these anyways, the stamping doesn't need a whole lot of detail. You can do it on best if you want it to just be really, really clean. But even on normal, it's pretty clean. Like you can look at these things and you're not going to find machine lines or hardly anything in it. It's almost perfect. Yep.
I just want to comment that your explanation of bit optimization was probably the most important and explanation of anything you've said so far.
Well, good. That's good. Well, another thing that's important. Let's continue on the optimization thing.
What is the default on bit optimization?
None.
None. Okay.
Default is none because we want you to look at it and define what it is that you need. And not everything needs bit optimization, but it's something that you always have to look at.
I never knew that.
Yeah, so I look at anytime you're doing any carving, you've got different stages of it. You've got your idea stage, you've got your layout stage, and you've got your optimization stage. Before you go to carve, you go to your optimization stage. And I wasn't here, I guess we probably didn't talk about optimization enough yesterday.
You talk about fine tuning, but not optimization.
Yeah, well, when you go in and you make sure that you've got your drafts set. So is anybody here going to carve raster text without a draft ever again? No, you never ever will.
Only by mistake.
Huh?
Only if you make a mistake.
Yeah, well, that's part of that optimization stage, and it should be part of everything that you carve. You go through and you really look at it. It's like, okay, do I got my draft set? Do I need draft on this? And most likely you do. You go through and look at all your drafts, set your feathers if you need a feather, because there's no reason to have straight up and down edges on almost anything that you carve. It's much nicer to let things gradually come in and out. So add those drafts, those bevels and those feathers so that you've got a nice flow. It's easier on your machine. It's going to actually take less time to carve, and it's going to make everything come out a lot better. So I made the whole thing into a pattern. That thing that we just laid out,
Yeah.
I put it all in a folder, made it into a pattern. So now it's a pattern right here in my library. And then
Invert on that screen where you bring it.
so then once you drop it on the board, you just use your invert button to invert it.
So, and that makes those two exactly the same, just inverted.
Yeah. So in fact, you don't even need to make 2 project boards for this. You just make one, and you lay your pattern on it, get it positioned, and upload that one, and then invert it and upload the other one, and just give them 2 different names on your memory card. But it can be the same file, so you know everything's in the exact same place and it's the exact same depth because it's all the same
You don't
thing.
have to select the different elements, you just hit the one invert. And
Yeah, that's why you make the whole thing into one pattern, because then it just makes that so much easier on yourself. Because if you've got them all individual elements, you've got to invert each one separately. What a mess you're going to get into real fast. So, put them all, group it all together, and fuse it into one pattern so that it's quick and easy.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Well, we've talked enough about panels, I think. It's a fun technique, and I wanted to share that with you. But let's go into some of the other layout pieces here. The layout was pretty simple. It was just a matter of defining in my design the size of things, what they needed to be, and then using my elements to go in and define some things. Now, one thing that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to pass this around, is that I don't leave any surface of my carvings uncarved. It's not, for many reasons. The main reason is it's a lot easier to clean it up and sand it, so that whole thing in the background there's got texture to it. It's much more interesting looking, for one, and it's easier to clean up and sand and finish if you don't have all this just flat space that you've left there. I like my carvings to be detailed and busy. So I'll show you how we did like the wine rack there, the front, the decorative ones. So we'll go to our pattern library and we'll grab my C. And I need to rotate it 180 degrees. And then kind of squish it down. And then I used my copy offset function here. Excuse me. Copy offset is part of the 2D drawing suite, but it allows you to take an element and then repeat it in an organized way in either a horizontal or vertical direction. So you're seeing there, I've got my green one, and then I've added these other elements there, and you can set the spacing of them, and then it'll just automatically create a line of things perfectly spaced for you. All right, so I'm going to draw my rack shape. So I'm going to end up carving all this out. So when I don't want to put just a rectangle behind there. So I'm going to use my arc drawing tools here and build my structure just in the background, so that I'm not actually going to see these lines because they'll be behind these patterns, so they don't have to be perfect.
Why wouldn't you copy all of those? Just curious.
Because then I couldn't join them together.
Okay.
I could copy, like just do a copy and paste.
Yeah, like copy and paste.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's just probably just as fast and easy to just draw them out. There's always 10 ways to do everything, so. And I'm not necessarily always going to choose the easiest route, so you know, don't necessarily think that just because I'm doing it this way that that's the absolute right way to do it. You might have a better way.
I'm just lazy. I like to copy as much as possible.
Lazy comes in real handy when you're working in software.
Yes.
It allows you to develop techniques that make things go a lot faster. So you're doing it right. Okay, so then we've got something I can make a region now. I can carve that down in there. I'm going to make my board a little bit bigger because I need some more space here. This is obviously not the exact dimensions of my trunk, but for presentation purposes we don't need to get precise. We'll make that 20 inches.
But you had already figured out the dimensions of the board prior to the carving. You said you don't know.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So, you know, building anything, you sit down and you plan it and you design it and work out all your dimensions of what you're going to do before you ever sit down to do it. And so then once I had this shape kind of defined here, I used another of my 2D drawing tools. I'm going to use the copy or the a path offset tool. And with this tool, I can take a line drawing that I did like this, and I can click on that, and I can just create another path exactly with those parameters, but just offset by whatever distance that I want it to be. So I want to make this offset by 1/4 inch, and I want to put it on the inside of what I just drew, not on the outside. Okay, so here is my offset. I'm going to adjust those curves a little bit. And then on this outside one, I'm going to set that to a depth of 0, and then I'm going to make it a additive merge so that it ends up having my other one recessed, so I end up getting these kind of levels there, and I've got a region within a region, which using that merge is the proper way to do that. And a lot of people have trouble with this, because if you just try to draw a region deeper on another region, I'm sure people here have seen that they don't show up properly. So you need to use that merge so that you can add them together and get that defined. Alright, so once I kind of had my shape worked out there, then I just started filling things with patterns. Like, okay, I got this neat rosette. Let's fill it in. And just work with the depths. Actually, and you can get as precise about this as you need to. Right now, for time's sake, because it's almost lunch, I'm kind of going a little bit quicker, but you can go in and make sure that these are all exactly lined up with each other, which I recommend doing. Don't skimp on your details. And then also on this region that I put here, I used my texture tool. It's like I said, I don't want any background that's untouched by the bit, as I'm going to end up with recessed, carved areas in there that are going to have machine lines in there that I'm going to have to try to figure out how to go in there and sand and get those out. If I flood that whole thing with the texture, I don't have to worry about it. So I can take that and I can define that texture to whatever spacing that I want, or interval. So it's at a default of 1 inch. And what did I set it at? I think it's 1/8 of an inch. And that kind of floods that whole thing. All right, so this is kind of overwhelming things a little bit, because these ends up with all these little tiny spikes. So anytime you use that texture, well, every time I've never used it without reducing the height a lot. So I usually go back to like 10 or 20 on a height of that and push it back behind everything else. So you end up with this nice textured background, which when you go to sand, it's going to be easier to deal with. But then also, you see on the carvings there, it makes the background darker. So when you apply stain to that, because it's got that texture and there's so much bump, it ends up becoming darker, and the patterns, the carvings that are sitting up above it, end up popping out a lot more because they are more smoothed out and sanded, and then you've got this darker background, so everything pops out. It looks much more dynamic. The old French style furniture that you'll see, they use this technique on everything, and they actually put little kind of stippled patterns in the background of all their carvings and everything. So we've got the ability to flood these backgrounds with these textures too, to create that same kind of effect that they were doing, back then. So I like to use it, and I recommend you guys try it as well. It'll add more time to your carving, but the end results are going to be far better.
Can you make your own textures without those?
You can import your own textures. So the importing tools that we used yesterday for Connie's demonstrations about importing any images, JPEGs, PNGs, or anything of any texture you can get a hold of, you can import those in and use them. Doug Hafner, who is one of our customers, who was a speaker the last couple of years, he's famous for his use of textures, and he takes pictures of everything with his phone to use for carving textures for the signs. So he will take pictures of the carpet and he'll import that in, because when it interprets it into that dimensional image that it does with importing in things, those textures can get really, really interesting. So you want to get like that sandblasted wood grain look that you see on a lot of signs. Just go find a picture of a piece of wood and import it in, and it'll automatically give you that pattern. And then you can just put it in your carving and put it behind your carvings, and you've got textures there. So, we've got a few preset textures that you can set intervals for here in the software, or you can import in anything else that you want and use that. So I just kept playing with this. So we'll just kind of, taking the patterns from my pattern set and just moving things around and positioning them, and then just repeating the patterns. So using your copy and paste. and I made it very busy. I didn't want to leave a lot of undefined space. So in the end, it looks like this really complex thing again, but then when broken down to its basic elements, it's just a use of a few simple patterns and then just arranged in a way that makes it look complex. And even with the basic pattern set that comes with the designer software, if you use these techniques of bunching, like make it busy, layer things up like this, add textures to the backgrounds, you can make things look incredible in ways that you didn't even know that basic pattern set would let you do it.
How do you set the cut line for the C's?
That's a good question. So let's organize our stuff a little bit here. Okay, so there's our C's and the outside shape of the outside rectangle, right? I can select all of those and I can come up here to our outline patterns button. And I can click that and it'll give me one outline of just the elements that I have selected. With that outline tool, you can then go tell it to cut it out. Use the cutout tool. And have it ready to cut out.